Welcome to Wickedly Judged, the podcast where we expose wrongful convictions, advocate for justice reform, and fight for a system that truly serves justice. I'm your host, Rebecca, and I want to thank you for joining us today for a very special episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Veteran Alliance, for their ongoing support. Their commitment to justice reform and advocacy is vital to the work we do here at Wickedly Judged. And a huge shout out to JP Verse of Versifier Records for providing the incredible intro and outro music that sets the tone for all of our episodes. If you're new here, Wickedly Judged is more than just a podcast. It's a movement. We're dedicated to exposing the flaws in the justice system through in-depth investigations, powerful storytelling, and a relentless commitment to advocacy. I also want to remind you to check out our website at wickedlyjudged.com, where you can learn more about our mission, read our blog, and browse our exclusive merchandise. Our store features items like the Wickedly Judged logo t-shirt, the Prison Reform t-shirt, and the Justice is Blind t-shirt. All are reasonably priced at $19.99. Every purchase directly supports our fight for justice and helps us keep this podcast going. Now, let's talk about today's episode. This is a pre-recorded interview that I did with Tony Viola, and it's a story that will leave you stunned. Tony was a man who faced not one, but 3 indictments and 2 trials on identical charges. Tony was wrongfully convicted and sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. But his story doesn't end there. From his jail cell, Tony uncovered evidence that not only proved his innocence, but also exposed systemic misconduct at the highest levels of the justice system. This episode will take you through the shocking details of Tony's case, from prosecutorial misconduct to the courageous whistleblowing efforts of Dawn Pasela, who risked everything, ultimately her life, to reveal the truth. Tony's story is a powerful reminder of why justice reform is so urgently needed. Let's begin by setting the stage for Tony's story. Tony Viola's case is one of the most egregious examples of wrongful conviction we've ever covered. Accused of deceiving banks like JP Morgan into granting no money down mortgage loans, Tony became the target of a multi-jurisdictional mortgage fraud task force. At his first trial, Tony was convicted and sentenced to over a decade in prison. But from his jail cell, without legal representation, he uncovered evidence that the Justice Department had withheld. Evidence that not only proved his innocence, but also raised serious questions about the task force itself and the 1,300 citizens it prosecuted. Tony's case is riddled with misconduct. Federal prosecutor Mark Bennett and Dan Casares denied under oath that they had interviewed bank executives who admitted that no money down loans were knowingly approved. A key government witness, Catherine Clover, was romantically involved with state prosecutor Dan Casares, a relationship that was never disclosed. FBI agent Jeff Kassouf admitted to failing to produce thousands of critical documents, and evidence was even destroyed during Tony's prosecution. And then there's the story of Dawn Pasela, a whistleblower who risked everything, ultimately her life, to provide Tony with the evidence he needed to prove his innocence. Dawn's story ends in her mysterious and untimely death, raising even more questions about the lengths people will go through to suppress the truth. Tony's fight for justice didn't end with his acquittal. He continues to advocate for reform and accountability, shining a light on the systemic issues that led to his wrongful conviction. Now, let's hear directly from Tony Viola in this pre-recorded interview. Thank you guys for joining us today on Wickedly Judged. I have Tony Viola with me, who is going to tell you about what he went through with a state case and a federal case. And let's hear from Tony. Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate the chance to be on your show. Thank you, and thanks for all the good work you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, it takes a community. We all got to stick together and work through this.
That's true. It's no small trick to overturn convictions and drive change in this country.
No, it is not. So let's get into the meat of your case. First, tell us what you were convicted of. Walk us through the timeline of events that led to your indictment and the conviction.
Okay, well, I was actually put on trial twice on the same charges. So I was convicted and then subsequently acquitted. But and there was a federal trial, which I was convicted of, and a subsequent trial on the same charges where I was acquitted. So my name is Tony Viola. I'm from a big Italian Catholic family in Cleveland, Ohio. I started a real estate business. And we made a lot of mistakes. We started with no money. It's great to start a business when you're 21. You think you know everything. Who needs experience? But anyway, long story short is, if you fast forward 15 years, we built a really nice company, my colleagues and I, a real estate brokerage firm, selling properties, doing property management, real estate auctions. We had well over 100 team members with a nice office in downtown Cleveland, and my life changed in 1 second because out of the blue, the FBI kicked the door down and said that I stole $46 million from banks, and that I was running this mortgage business, and that it was the nation's largest mortgage fraud case, that I had caused all this recession and these foreclosures. It was Tony's fault over here, this guy, because I stole $46 million through these fake loans. These lenders were duped and tricked into making loans for people to buy properties that they weren't qualified to buy. And so there was a televised circus right from the beginning, totally out of the blue. I never had any criminal history, never any problem with anybody. And all of a sudden, I'm the biggest crook in the country. Live, breaking news, CNN. It was unbelievable. My life literally changed in an instant. So the government alleged that I had siphoned all these millions of dollars through this mortgage company. And I did not own a mortgage company. I owned a real estate company. We were realtors, not mortgage officials. And so in law enforcement, the lack of evidence was like, aha, he must be guilty. We can't find any mortgage documents. I mean, it's the craziest case. And the government was very slapdash. They did not know what businesses I owned, and yet they went on TV. They had a press conference, press releases, videos, perp walks. I was indicted in federal court and state court, $46 million. I stole all this money. And it just becomes impossible to defend yourself when the government creates this narrative, even though it was false. So I'll give you a quick, for instance, the two things that really were shocking in the beginning. The first thing we did was I hired a lawyer, and we contacted this bank. And they said, I don't owe them any money. I didn't steal any money. So the government is going on TV saying I stole millions of dollars from JP Morgan Chase Bank and Citibank. And they're saying, no, I don't know that I didn't. They don't have any claims against me. And the prosecutor said it didn't matter. So once the government locks themselves into a narrative, there's just nothing they're ever willing to do. You just can't sit down and talk to them. They wouldn't talk to us. They said I was a target of the investigation. I wanted to show them my tax returns. I wanted my real estate lawyer to go down and explain all this. I had these employees. My business was being destroyed. My reputation was being destroyed. And they did not want to hear it. They would not meet with us. So if you think court is fair, like I did at the time, I was naive. I had no idea how this stuff worked. And I just couldn't believe. So I found myself in this crazy situation where I knew I didn't steal $46 million, and I knew I didn't own a mortgage company, and I was put on trial for these things. And so as the case proceeded, I can fill you in on what the prosecutors started doing to quote, win the case.
Yeah, I know that they used a multi-jurisdictional mortgage fraud task force and that it played
Correct.
a significant role in your case.
Right.
How did their
Right.
involvement shape the investigation and the charges against you?
Right. So here's one of the problems with these task forces. They have 50 plus law enforcement officials looking to go after people with this theory that lenders were duped or tricked into making loans, and that must be the fault of these people. So it sort of started with a conclusion. Okay, so that was one challenge. Once they start with a conclusion that the bank is an innocent victim and that you guys did all this wrongdoing, it becomes a narrative. And the indictments, they went after 1,200 people. It's almost the same. It's almost a copy and paste of the same stuff, where you sold houses and people were buying houses and went into foreclosure, and it's not the bank's fault, it's your fault. But the other thing about the task force, it was a perfect mechanism for wrongdoing by the government. So I'll give you, for instance, the federal prosecution was headed up by a guy named Mark Bennett, who was subsequently fired and disbarred. But at the time, he was certainly very powerful. And so what they would do is they would send a state detective to interview people. And if somebody, like my colleagues would say, well, Tony doesn't own a mortgage company. He's a good guy. This is crazy. I wouldn't work for him if he was no, thanks. We'll call you if we need you. And so they were screening witnesses, looking for people who would say something that would be incriminating about me. But people who said, oh, no, you guys are way off base, they would say, thanks. And then the FBI and the Justice Department say, well, we never interviewed that person. We don't know anything about it. So like this task force was used as a witness screening mechanism. It was also used as a way to shift evidence between locations and jurisdictions. And the federal judge would throw his arms up in the air and say, well, I can't order the state. That's separate sovereigns, and we can't have. And then the state judge would say the same thing. Well, gee, I can't order the FBI to produce records. So the government was playing this game of separate sovereigns. But then when they felt like working together through this task force, they would. Let me tell you, when it says United States of America versus Tony, that's what that means. The government is just going to smash you. And so, I'm just a private citizen. I'm just like a nerdy business guy. And now I got to go and track where the evidence was tracked. It just became impossible to even get evidence. Then the other thing that happened was one of our defenses was going to be, well, gee, I didn't steal $46 million from the mortgage company. Why don't we find out where this mortgage company is? And the government had raided their offices too. They raided my real estate company. And so we asked for the computers from the mortgage company that I didn't own, so I could show that I never got any money. I wasn't involved there. And then Mark Bennett, they said, well, we lost them. We don't have the computers. And so they would blame the task force. So no one was personally ever responsible. It was, oh, shucks, it's the bureaucrats somewhere else. I did my job. I didn't lose the computers. They lost them over at the task force. So the lack of accountability in law enforcement is already bad enough as it is, and then you add this task force on. It's like the perfect bureaucratic mechanism to make it expensive to do anything other than plead guilty and say, thank you for prosecuting me. I'm sorry, I'm pleading guilty. Or if you try to fight, the cost is just astronomical because they're making us go to court and different courts and different hearings and arguments about what policeman interviewed what witness, and we lost the evidence. By the way, incidentally, right there, if there was any fairness, if this federal judge, Don Nugent, who is a prosecutor, it's the same. He should not be sitting up with the judge. He was sitting with his buddy, the prosecutor. But, there's no basis to continue to prosecute somebody if the government loses key evidence. I mean, there's all kinds of cases about this. California versus Trombetta. And it's the Supreme Court has held that you can't defend yourself if the government loses key evidence. But nobody, I said, hey, why don't we file something to say, no, you can't upset the prosecutor. So this was like sort of like a steamroller or something, like a bulldozer going down the street that just no one would get in front of. When these lawyers saw that the feds and the state were both coming after me, they were just very, very fearful of fighting. And of course, there was one person over at the task force named Dawn Pasela. We'll talk about her later, but she was sort of witnessing this from the inside and absolutely apoplectic about what was going on with the games with evidence and shifting documents around. And she was absolutely shocked. And so later our lives intersected.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in a minute.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the whole trial and conviction.
Okay.
During your federal trial, under Judge Donald Nugent, you raised concerns about conflicts of interest involving defense attorneys and government witnesses. Can you
Correct.
elaborate on that?
Yes. So when the government comes after you, you have the right to an attorney, the right to counsel, okay, to defend yourself. And part of the right to counsel is conflict-free legal counsel. So my lawyer, a guy named Jay Milano, and by the way, flushing money down the toilet would be better than giving it to Jay Milano, because if you just flush your money down the toilet, you don't expect anything. This guy is bombastic, and he's got this giant ego, and he's going to fight him to the death and all this stuff. And it turned out that Jay Milano went behind my back and signed an agreement with the other attorneys that we weren't going to put on any evidence that was adverse to them. And it turned out that these other attorneys, especially a guy named Craig Weintraub, he was representing banks, the lenders that I blamed for any problems. I was like, look, I wasn't involved with mortgages. If there's problems, go after these people. And Craig Weintraub represented these lender employees. And so there's a blatant conflict of interest there. Then an attorney in Cleveland named Michael Goldberg represented Catherine Clover, who was the government's key witness, who claimed that Tony was at the mortgage company when I was lying on my loans. Turned out it was a different guy named Tony. So here you have these lawyers that are representing government witnesses against me and the banks and me. I mean, it's a total joke. So, and the government, Mark Bennett finds out about this and says, hey, wait a minute, this could be a conflict. I don't want to try this case twice. And the federal judge says, yeah, well, if there's a trial, I'll look into this and we'll see if these lawyers can still work together. Of course, I don't know this was happening at the time. I trusted my attorney, which is the dumbest thing ever. And I wasn't following the case docket and all this stuff. And I should have, I guess. Anyway, long story short is, when I raised this issue, when I found out about it, I went bonkers. And when I raised this issue, then the government, Mark Bennett, lied and said, oh, no, you signed a conflict waiver, and the judge held a hearing. And so I would have been released from jail. My conviction would have been vacated, except Mark Bennett lied, even though he originally said, hey, this could be a conflict before the trial, docket 110, USA versus Viola. Then later he lies and says, oh, no, you signed a conflict waiver. So I have a friend who went down to the court. I was in jail, and one of my friends was like, where is this conflict waiver? So I actually had the clerk of court write a letter that said there is no hearing and there is no conflict waiver. Why is Mark Bennett lying and saying this stuff? And I actually sued Mark Bennett for $1, and because you have to ask for nominal damages. And I asked the judge to stop him from saying I signed this conflict of interest waiver, which I didn't. Denied. You can't file this kind of stuff. It's embarrassing. We're appalled. So anyway, there's no justice in this country. And even something as simple as proper representation in court, which is incredibly well documented here, because these lawyers aren't allowed to do all this. And I couldn't even waive it if I wanted to, I don't think. But a client is supposed to have at least a conflict waiver and say, are you comfortable with all of this? I never signed one thing. They're lying and say I signed it. And that's our country. This is the federal court. So the naive Tony would have thought, well, gee, lying to a federal judge is not a good idea. It's kind of a big deal, right? But not if you're a prosecutor. The prosecutors and the judges are buddies. It came out that Mark Bennett was playing poker with these judges on Thursday nights, and they're just very friendly with each other. And so nobody wants to rule for some criminal defendant, Tony. No one wants to let that guy out of jail. They work in the same building. They're at the same country clubs and all this. And so it's really amazing to me. It was eye-opening to me to see the abuse of power and the cavalier way in which we imprison people and treat people. It's ridiculous. And shame on these attorneys for doing it. But the fact of the matter is, if there's a conflict of interest, you didn't get adequate representation, and the conviction should have been vacated. And these people, shame on them. By the way, every day they could do the right thing. Every day the U.S. attorney or Mark Bennett or Don Nugent or any of these people could say, you know what, this was improper. There should have been a conflict waiver. But they won't do it. So every day, in my opinion, is like a new cover-up of this ridiculous situation.
Absolutely. So prosecutors Mark Bennett and Dan Casares played pivotal roles in your conviction. How did their actions, particularly denying interviews with bank executives under oath, mislead the court? Were there any other instances of prosecutorial misconduct in your case?
Well, there's blatant prosecutorial misconduct that's all established and in the record and proven, even to the point of both the FBI and the Justice Department each making separate admissions that Mark Bennett lied throughout my case. By the way, they admitted that he lied, but they still haven't thrown the first conviction out. They let me out of jail, but they don't want to throw the conviction out, which is ridiculous. So in terms of misconduct, there's several seriously wrong things. We already mentioned the destruction of these computers that were seized in televised raids. Oh, whoops, we don't have them. We have a romantic relationship, a sexual relationship between Dan Caceres and Catherine Clover, the lead government witness in these cases. She originally had said that Tony was at the mortgage company when there was fraud, and it turned out it was a different guy named Tony. Yes, it's true, folks. There's more than one Tony. And these knucklehead prosecutors never looked into, well, what's the guy's last name or whatever. So she thought Tony owns the mortgage company. Well, there was a guy, and Tony owns the title company. There was a guy named Tony who owned the title company, but it wasn't me. So anyway, long story short is she is, at the time, young and attractive, and Dan Caceres is in his early 50s. Caceres has a history of rescuing the damsel in distress, and I can rattle off names of people in criminal cases that he's had sexual relations with. He uses his authority as a prosecutor to say, look, I can make this go away, relax, take it easy, you're not going to go to jail, maybe you can help me with the case a little bit. And that's what he did to this Catherine Clover woman, and they were in a relationship, a sexual relationship. Mark Bennett knew it. It was never disclosed. It's a blatant conflict of interest. It's a total mockery of the court. Jurors are in there trying to figure out guilt or innocence, and they forgot to mention that, oh, by the way, this woman who's testifying for the government is sleeping with the prosecutor. So that's one crazy thing. The other thing is there was fabricated evidence. We actually have emails. Our best evidence of Mark Bennett and Dan Caceres' criminal activity is their own, what they put in writing. It's crazy. But they're actually talking about altering documents inside the prosecutor's office, and they're actually talking about fabricating testimony. So, like, for instance, several government witnesses would meet together at the same time to get their stories straight. Or Catherine Clover realized that I wasn't the Tony that owned the company, and she didn't want to testify to that, and they threatened her. And then they said, you got to make sure Tony doesn't find out that you're lying because we could lose the case. Mark Bennett puts in writing that Catherine Clover committed perjury at my trial. Here again, perjury, the government has an obligation to vacate the conviction and withdraw false testimony. And there's undisclosed financial benefits to these witnesses also. But the biggest crime that took place in my case is what happened with Dawn Pasela. Once Bennett and Caceres realized, I kept going on TV and bringing the indictment to the 6 o'clock news, and I kept saying, these people are stupid. How do they not know what companies I own? This is crazy. Mm-hmm. And so finally, I guess after a year of this or something, maybe somebody looked or something, I don't know. They must have known I didn't own the company because they destroyed the computers. But anyway, finally, they're at a point where, we have to move forward towards a trial, and they became concerned that they might lose the case. And I told them, I'm not pleading guilty. I don't care. I'm not giving advice to anybody. I'm not saying anyone should do what I did. But I told these people, the U.S. attorney and this state prosecutor, Caceres, to take the indictment and stick it, where. I said, look, I didn't steal $46 million. I don't own a mortgage company. I'm not pleading guilty to this crap. If you guys are so sloppy that you don't even know what companies I own, you won't even meet with my lawyer and my accountant, you're destroying everything I work for, you might get away with it. You might put me in jail. But I'm not making this easy and letting you mop this case up and call it a day by pleading guilty. Where you want a trial, we're going to go to trial. But anyway, once they realized that I was not going to plead guilty, they really were at a crossroads where they could either throw the case out or, which they wouldn't do because they never want to admit they're wrong, ever, no matter what. And then the other thing that they decided to do, they came up with this fakaktis idea to have their office lady, Dawn Pasela, 23 years old at the time, 23, that she's going to pretend to be a paralegal, and she's working with other defense lawyers on similar cases, and maybe she could help our lawyers and help us with our case. And so I met Dawn at we had these little happy hours, like case updates, fundraisers, for my friends and colleagues that were just apoplectic about what was going on. And so Dawn says she wants to help and she wants to provide information, and she's got these other lawyers with similar cases, and it's a winnable case, and she's a paralegal, a graduate student. And so on these fake pretenses, she starts getting involved with our legal defense and recording what we're saying and recording my attorney before trial after I'm indicted. This is like if I bugged the prosecutor's office. Man, I'd love to hear what they're saying. It'd be great. So I'm going to bug the prosecutors. It's crazy. This is a crime. This is illegal. to do, and yet this whole thing has been uncovered for over a decade with no consequences. So Dawn is wearing a wire, infiltrating our defense, finding out who our witnesses are. The FBI, so there's a guy named Brian Stark who was a colleague, and he wanted to testify for us. And so, they found out who our witnesses were. Then they send the FBI to this guy's office and say, look, man, if you testify for Tony, we're going to raid your company. We're going to indict you, indict your wife, indict your family. So they identified our witnesses and took action to prevent them from testifying in open court, okay? Instead of just throwing the case out and saying, let's leave this guy alone. They can't do it. So anyway, Dawn is seeing all of this, and she's more and more aware of two things. One, the games with the evidence was very upsetting to her, but also she was a brilliant lady, and she looked at these lender documents, and she understood what they meant, which was there was no fraud. There was no crime. Nobody tricked any bank into making any loans. There was no scam. And so the whole theory of the case of these banks being innocent victims and foreclosures were the fault of the realtor or the loan officer or the guy that bought the house was just wrong. So she basically became convinced that this is an actual innocence case, that you could prove that you're innocent. So she started keeping some of these documents. And the final straw for Dawn was right before the federal trial, the first trial. The lender victim guy flew into Cleveland, and they started asking him questions. And he basically said, look, there's no fraud here. We allow these loans. We signed off on all these loans. Well, the prosecutors are going nuts. By the way, 3 weeks before the trial, this case had gone on almost 3 years before that. My life was ruined for 3 years before the trial, okay? And nobody ever called the victim, supposed the victim in this case, right? So in other words, what's supposed to happen in this stupid country is the first thing that's supposed to happen is a crime. My God, I came home. Right? My God, I came home. Somebody shot. Let's call the police. What happened? Let's find out who did it, right? Here, the government was alleging that I stole millions of dollars, even though the lender said I didn't take any money and I don't owe them any money, and even though they never interviewed the supposed victim in the case until 3 weeks before the trial. So that's law enforcement. Start with a conclusion and work backwards and backfill any evidence in that comports with our theory. Anything that doesn't, we disregard. So this interview was the seminal moment for Dawn, because this lender, this guy named Steve Newcomb, he's like, look, I don't want to testify that these people tricked us or whatever. These loans say the guy's not putting a down payment down. It says they don't have any income. Maybe they were zany, but I don't really want to testify that these people should go to prison. And the prosecutor threatened the guy at the bank, and there was all this jumping up and down and, swearing and everything else. Dawn asked the prosecutors, why in the heck are we putting these people in jail? Why are we putting this guy on trial when the victim just told you that they allow these loans? And so that FBI interview was suppressed before the first trial, but Dawn got a copy of it, and she later gave it to me when I lost the first trial. I was convicted, but I wasn't yet sentenced. And that's when she came forward and told me about all this stuff. And that key interview was really, there's millions of pieces of paper in this case, but that was the beginning of actually proving innocence, because the guy that's supposed to be the victim is saying they're not a victim.
So that one little report changed everything.
3 pages, 3 pieces of paper where they said that they allow these loans, that their lender employees were allowed to sign off on these no money down loans. People didn't have to make a down payment. They could buy multiple houses at once. It's not a crime. Maybe it's reckless. Maybe they shouldn't have made loans like that, but it doesn't mean that the realtor should go to jail for 20 years.
Right, exactly. The FBI admitted to failing to produce thousands of critical documents during your trial, and evidence was even destroyed. Can you describe how FBI agent Jeff Kassouf's involvement added to the challenges in your case? And what does this reveal about systemic issues in evidence handling and oversight with the justice system?
Well, Jeff Kassouf was blamed a decade later. So I'm sitting in a jail cell for 8.5 years. And then one day, the case started unraveling with one more piece of paper. The Mark Bennett had said that the feds never put any evidence over to this task force. So I was exonerated at a second trial, or acquitted at a second trial, and I was trying to get out of jail and get my first conviction vacated. And the government said, well, your second trial was completely separate, and the feds never screwed around with that task force, and Dawn never could give you any evidence from the task force. And then I got this one piece of paper that said, oh, FBI agent Kassouf put all the evidence at the task force before the first trial. So one piece of paper contradicted a decade of their lies in court. Now, I'd already been in jail for 8.5 years, so this was a heck of a time. I guess better late than never, right? Whoopsie, we lied. Everything we've said about evidence should be disregarded. They wrote some letter to this judge, and they apologized, not to me, but to the judge. We apologize for any inconvenience. Inconvenience is, I know you guys ordered onion rings, but I brought you French fries. Is that okay? Going to jail for like a decade and losing everything you worked for your whole life is more than an inconvenience, okay? So it is absolutely ridiculous. So then the FBI is asked, well, why did you lie about evidence? What happened, And so they said, well, FBI agent Kassouf, he took things in his briefcase that he didn't enter into the system, and he took it home with him or something. And we thought that by searching the system, it was all the evidence, but it turned out that there was hard copies that he put in his briefcase or something, and we just found out about this, which is ridiculous because all the stuff that was in the briefcase happened to be exculpatory, like that lender interview where, we didn't lose any money. No, we're not a victim. Okay, if there's no victim, there's no fraud, there's no crime. The whole crime has to have a victim. Right. So anyway, and that's the other thing. The other thing too is, listen to this. In 2016, the FBI was ordered, and so was Bennett, the federal prosecutor. They were ordered by a judge, Susan Baxter, in Erie, Pennsylvania. I was in prison in Pennsylvania at the time, so part of the case is litigated there. So they're ordered to produce these tapes that Dawn made. So these tapes have never been produced. She recorded my trial prep, right? Federal Criminal Rule 16 says anything with this defendant's voice on it must be produced before trial. It doesn't matter if I'm talking about sports or whatever. It doesn't matter, okay? Mm-hmm. But they didn't do that. So they violated that. Then the court ordered them to do it. Once they started saying we lied and we made all these false statements, where are these tapes? They're ordered to do it. Now, that's 9 years ago, and they still haven't been produced. Now, could you imagine if you were ordered, let's say you had some document that a federal court wanted or the judge, oh my God, could you lollygag for 9 years? Well, we have a heavy workload. Oh, it's Christmas. I mean, well, when did you think Christmas was going to come this year? I mean, it's unbelievable. So when they were prosecuting me, we never missed a beat, okay? I mean, we had court the day before Thanksgiving. We had press conferences, raids, guns, SWAT teams, pontoon boats in the Cuyahoga River, want these realtors swimming to Canada. They had helicopters. I mean, all this stuff, okay? 3 indictments, perp walks, reporters banging on my door at 6 a.m. Would you care to comment on the latest charges? These are serious charges. But now, all of a sudden, when they're ordered to do something, then it takes 9 years. So the answer is, with what you asked, what's systemic about it? I mean, first of all, let's assume there's no misconduct, and this is just a mistake, okay? Then we shouldn't prosecute anybody for a month until the FBI can figure out its own record system. Okay, so the fact that this hasn't piqued anybody's interest, that the FBI doesn't know what records they have or their agents have before trial, means they can't ever say that they complied with their Brady violation. It's a threat to the liberty of every citizen. And this FBI agent should be fired, whether it's misconduct or incompetence. Lastly, it's a heck of a thing to ask a private citizen to be proving all this FBI misconduct. I mean, it's not up to me to prove why the evidence was hidden or whose fault it is or what person at this task force. The question is the materiality of the evidence itself. That's the core of a Brady violation. And the lack of bad faith or good faith, it doesn't matter what they meant or if the guy's a really good dad and he coaches softball. Innocent people are in prison, okay, because evidence is not being turned over. And by the way, this isn't just Tony. I mean, there's 2 key things to remember. This is just what these guys do. Dan Caceres has lost computers in all kinds of cases. It's the same nonsense. Mark Bennett has threatened people, threatened to indict their wives. This is just what these guys do. It's not like they said, gee, we normally play it fair, but let's really stick it to Tony. The other thing about my case that's important to remember is this is not a DNA case. This is not a one-off case. If I'm innocent, then 1,200 people that were prosecuted by this task force may be innocent too, or a large number of them, particularly where this Catherine Clover that was having the sexual relationship with Dan Caceres, who, by the way, that's Dave Yost's number 2 guy in the Ohio Attorney General's office, a senior assistant Ohio Attorney General. And Caceres has done this crap with these women for 3 decades, okay? Kelly Connors testified in a case in Youngstown, Ohio versus Tammy Keaton, and boo-hoo, I'm the victim, and she was in a sexual relationship with Caceres. He manages her money through a power of attorney and a special needs trust. He's not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to have outside income without approval of the Ohio Attorney General's office, but they don't follow their own rules. And so this kind of stuff. And so anyway, I guess the point is when you ask about systemic, this is just what goes on. This isn't only Tony. We're only going to stick it to Tony. In the other cases, we're going to turn over the evidence. How this guy hasn't been fired and indicted is beyond belief. And then when the judge ordered Kassouf to turn over the tapes, he said, well, I listened to them, the ones that Dawn made, but I don't have them anymore because I sent them to the task force. So this is another thing that's absolutely ridiculous. If you don't feel like producing evidence because you want to win, and you want to high-five your law enforcement buddies outside of court when Tony's going to jail. And the idea that you can move evidence from one building to another, the U.S. attorney is on West 9th Street, and the task force building was on West 25th Street, and the Cuyahoga County prosecutor's office is in Ontario, okay, and Lakeside Avenue. These are all like a couple blocks away from each other. But we're gonna pack stuff up that's exculpatory that we don't feel like producing because we went on TV and had a press conference. And we're going to send it to another building. I mean, there were 18 agencies that were part of this task force. I've literally had to litigate and sue and do records requests with all these different government agencies. And they all say, well, we gave you everything, but maybe it's at the task force. It's absolutely ridiculous that these task forces are set up. It becomes impossible to defend yourself.
Yeah, because they have no chain of evidence. They don't sign anything out. They don't sign anything in. And if they do, it's only what they can use to prove that their case is correct.
Yes, exactly. No one person is responsible, and you blame the bureaucracy, and so there's no accountability when the FBI agent should be responsible for turning over FBI evidence. So this task force blurs accountability. It's a fiction. That a bunch of cops sitting around with a coffee pot form this task force, and that it's this other legal entity, this entity that is, well, that's separate from us. We can't order anybody there to produce certain things. We can only give you what we have in our possession. It's a bunch of nonsense.
Absolutely. Now, Arvin Clark, I think that's how you say his name.
Yes, Arvin Clark, another Ohio Attorney General, Ohio BCI, Bureau of Criminal Investigation.
Now, he was the chair of the Mortgage Fraud Task Force, and he oversaw...
And he hired Dawn Pasela.
And he hired Dawn. And he oversaw many questionable practices, including, like you were saying, undisclosed payments to informants and evidence manipulation. So what role did his leadership play in shaping the flawed narrative against you? And have you been able to uncover any evidence about his personal finances or other activities that support allegations of corruption?
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the last one first. Arvin Clark, who supposedly works for the Ohio Attorney General's office, BCI, okay, and he's testifying in criminal cases that banks are innocent victims of these nefarious realtors and loan officers like this Tony guy over here. You got to put him in jail. Arvin Clark forgot to tell the jury that he also is a paid security consultant for banks, and he gives seminars for financial institutions. So if you pay me enough money, I guess I'll say that a bank is an innocent victim too, right? I mean, the guy had undisclosed financial entanglements with banks. And if you are investigating and the banks are supposedly victims, the victims shouldn't be paying you as a consultant off the books and some other to walk around the bank branch and say, oh, look, you could maybe put another lock on that window up there. So first of all, the whole thing is a joke that these guys are saying with their badges and all this stuff, the bank's an innocent victim when he's getting paid by these same people. So it was not disclosed to the jurors. Now, the other thing is about these undisclosed dollars to these witnesses. It's very important for folks to understand this. The government is allowed to pay informants or witnesses. They're allowed to pay them. But a jury can consider some, all, or none of a witness's testimony. So, for instance, when Catherine Clover was speaking, they didn't tell the jury that Dean Caceres was giving her cash to pay her bills, helped her get a scholarship so she could go to school for free. Okay, she was running some massage parlor and wasn't paying taxes because she was getting cash, and they told the IRS not to prosecute her. None of that was disclosed. That was all stuff that we figured out later. Well, the thing is, let's say she testifies Tony was at the mortgage company, okay, whatever, and the defense lawyers jump up and down. When the jurors go to the jury room to deliberate, they could consider some, all, or none of a witness's testimony. Well, had it been disclosed that Clover was having sex with the prosecutor, he would have been arrested on the spot, right? So they didn't bother to do that. But had it been disclosed that they were paying her money, The jurors could have said, maybe, I mean, it's up to them. They could have said, you know what? Let's leave her testimony aside. She's getting paid. I don't really like that. She's not testifying maybe from personal knowledge. She's getting money. What other evidence is there against this guy? Let's look at the other evidence. Let's set her aside for the moment. So the jurors have the ability to consider some, all, or none of any witness's testimony, but the jurors were deceived. I mean, this whole thing makes a mockery of the court with the big American flag in the background and all this, please rise, the judge is walking in. Well, and the prosecutor's having sex with the witness and paying all her bills, and nobody bothered to tell anybody that. It's terrible. So Arvin Clark is sort of the orchestra conductor of all this shenanigans. He also hired Dawn, and I think Dawn was incredibly intelligent, but she was also gorgeous. And I think he probably thought she was some kind of like dingling or something that was going to just, make coffee all day and be eye candy for these dudes to look at. And I think they underestimated how smart she was and didn't realize that she was very serious about justice and doing the right thing, and sort of thought it was a solemn responsibility if we're prosecuting somebody to make sure that we're putting guilty people in prison, but the innocent people are cleared. And so I don't think he expected that from Dawn either. And so Arvin Clark later, when Dawn came forward and offered to testify at my second trial, he was one of the people that was threatening her.
Wow, that is crazy. So I guess it's okay to threaten to get what you want now, but isn't that a criminal act right there? Wait a minute. Oh, yeah, I heard of an attorney who actually lost his law license for threatening somebody.
Correct.
I mean, because it's a crime. You can't do that, but yet...
It's witness tampering, it's witness intimidation, it's absolutely improper. Prosecutors and the other thing, by the way, yes, they do it all the time. They shouldn't do it. It's interfering with a government proceeding. It's interfering with the fair administration of justice. Mark Bennett and Dan Caceres could be arrested today, even before we get to Dawn's suspicious death, as she's supposed to testify in my case. There's so many felonies that these guys have committed, it's unbelievable. I mean, they could go to jail for decades just with the stuff that we can prove by their own emails. The other thing, too, that's important, and this goes back to this qualified immunity issue, which is hopefully going to be on the ballot in Ohio, is that a prosecutor's job is to present the government's case in court. A prosecutor is not really supposed to be an investigator. That's what the FBI is, or that's what detectives do. In this case, they blurred Arvin Clark. All these guys blurred all these lines, okay? And so Dan Caceres jumps in the car and goes to the Starbucks to interview witnesses. And you've got a complete blurring of the lines of different job responsibilities. So there's really no checks and balances. So, like a prosecutor, like you see on TV, we'll go get some more evidence. Let's make sure we have, when they're all like buddy-buddy and everyone's working on the same thing and everyone's doing everyone's job at the same time, it's very problematic. So that's the other thing, too. The structure of this task force and what these people were actually doing on a day-to-day basis is unbelievable, even to the point of letting Catherine Clover come into the prosecutor's office and remove evidence that she didn't want. Okay, they didn't call me and say, gee, Tony, why don't you come down? If there's any inconvenient, if you wrote some stupid email or something, take it out of here. So they're actually going through the file, and Dawn is going crazy when she's seeing this. We actually have not only multiple government witnesses at the same time in meetings to get their story straight, got to put this Tony guy in jail so we can get our story straight. They actually have Catherine Clover in the prosecutor's office reviewing documents and taking documents out, which, by the way, is another issue because she's testifying as a fact witness of what you personally saw. Right. So if I see some guy speeding away from the bank and he shot 3, guns and he got in a brown car, I mean, I can testify to that because I saw that. But what's happening was Clover was falsely portrayed as a fact witness. She was actually the prosecutor's lover. She's actually getting money. And she's actually like a paralegal inside the prosecutor's office where she's actually talking to these people in interviews with the banks and other people. This is completely inappropriate. And so she's sort of a professional witness or an advocate witness or an expert witness, but not a fact witness. Gee, I was just going to get my loan and Tony was at the mortgage company and Tony said the lie. So the poor lady had a breakdown during the federal trial, wanting to go back on the stand to correct her false testimony. Clover realized that her false testimony was going to send people to jail. And Mark Bennett and Dan Caceres threatened her and said, you can't do that. So it's a case of the government using fabricated evidence intentionally and lying repeatedly And then, of course, the Dawn stuff is a whole nother planet of misconduct. It's just unbelievable what they did to her.
Yeah, we're about to hit there right now. So Dawn Pasela played a pivotal role in your acquittal by providing critical evidence. Kind of tell me a little bit about why, how can I say this? Why the prosecutors did what they did and why she is no longer alive.
Wow.
I think I think that's the best way I can word it.
Yeah, no, it's brutal. It's brutal. Dawn was my friend. I wouldn't be on your show right now. I'd be in prison still if it wasn't for Dawn helping me. Dawn was an idealist. I mean, she was brilliant, and she knew what these documents meant, that people were innocent, and she also, was no pushover. I mean, she confronted these people. I mean, she's 23, 24 years old. These are powerful, federal officials. Mark Bennett was, 50 plus years old, highly decorated prosecutor, got awards for doing all on TV all the time, Dan Caceres. And she tells them, you guys are full of shit. And so, I mean, it's really an amazing story that she confronts them and then decides to take the evidence. Then she feels like she has to make amends with me. So she told me, that she was sorry she wore a wire, and that she said, I asked her if she thought I was innocent. And she said, I know more about your case than you. I know that you're innocent. And I said, well, how do you know? And she said, well, I have all the evidence. I said, well, where is the evidence? She said, well, I have it. I said, well, you have to give it to me. And she said, no, if you file it in court, Don Nugent, the federal judge, will seal it up. They'll indict me for stealing it. You're going to have to use this at your second trial. So first, she's wearing a wire to get our trial strategy. Then she's seeing what's going on inside the prosecutor's office. Then she's kind of hanging out with me and my friends, and she probably thought I was this terrible person. But then she sees I got nice friends and people that are upset about this. And so I think it just was a shock to her. And then she's taking the evidence that they're hiding out. And then she basically says, look, I'm going to help you prepare for the second trial, but you cannot use a lawyer. And I'm like, what? I got to do a trial myself? I'm probably going to be put in jail. She said, if you use a lawyer, they're all buddies with the prosecutor. They will call the prosecutor. This evidence will never see the light of day. You have to spring it on them at a second trial. And I was like, that's kind of like being hit by a truck. I'm like, what? And she's like, look, you're in the real estate business. It's like a sales presentation, except instead of presenting to some company about how you're going to manage their apartment building and do great things, you're the 12 jurors. You have to prove that you're innocent. We can have your employees testify. I have documents to show nobody was scammed. You didn't get any money. We'll show them your tax returns. You don't own these companies. Well, you have 100 employees. Every one of them could come in and say, what companies is how long have you worked for Tony? Oh, 15 years. Where does he secretly own some other company? No. Your accountant can come in. Your real estate lawyer can come in. So she sort of convinced me that maybe we could do this, right? I mean, by then I already knew about these conflicts of interest, and these lawyers totally sold me down the river. So I figured, well, we couldn't do much worse. So me and Dawn, with like 3 legal pads, like won a trial, even though all these high-powered, highfalutin, arrogant lawyers that tell you how smart they are couldn't figure out how to do it. And Dawn was brilliant, and she told me, if you want to win your second trial, you have to divide the trial into 2 parts: innocence and misconduct. I will be your last witness, Tony. I will talk about the criminal activity by Bennett and Caceres inside the task force, inside the prosecutor's office. You have to prove that you're innocent. And she told me something. It's very interesting. She said, if you blow up a kindergarten and kill a bunch of kindergartners, okay, and the cops screwed up the search warrant, and you want to go argue that in court, you're going to lose. Maybe people should care, but they don't. If you're guilty and you want to argue about prosecutorial misconduct, nobody cares. You're going to lose. So she was really smart about prove that you're innocent. Then I will come in and I will explain the misconduct. And I promised Dawn, because I think she wanted to move forward with her life. She wanted to help me. She wanted to help other people that were similarly situated as me with similar cases. And then she wanted to move forward with her life. And I said, look, if I can win this trial, we'll open up a little office. We'll get all the evidence. We'll figure it out. We'll go find everybody that was prosecuted, whatever. I mean, we said we're just going to do the right thing for not just my case, but for other people that had gone through hell for no reason whatsoever, other than the prosecutors wanted to go on television. So that was our plan. And so the second trial was the complete opposite of the first. The prosecutors were caught lying. Dawn said, make sure you ask for this FBI 302 interview. I said, Dawn, why would I ask for it? You just gave it to me. And she said, Tony, are you an idiot? And I said, yes, but I still want you to tell me why I should ask for it. And she said, Tony, they've been lying to you about evidence. Get them on the record lying. Get them to lie right in front of the judge. They'll do it. So I said, Your Honor, I'd like the interview with the Oh, there is no interview. I'm sick of that. Dan Caceres is appalled. He's upset. I keep asking. So then I had it. I said, Your Honor, I have it here. They've been making false statements in your courtroom. So, that's how the trial went. And then Catherine Clover melted down at the second trial, admitted that she lied. Again, all this was because of Dawn. I would have not known this or been able to present this. But we were able to use documents. See, the government thought they destroyed the evidence. But the way to win a case like this is the documents. So Catherine Clover said that she lied on her loan application and exaggerated the amount of money she had, and I told her to do it. But when we actually whipped out these loan applications, it says she doesn't have any money. It says zero. How is this a scam? Hey, let's trick the bank. Okay, what do I do? Put that you have no money. So Dawn was right that the documents, which by the way are contemporaneous with the loans, not 6 years later, and you can't threaten the document, you can't threaten to indict the document's wife or girlfriend. So these documents, we call her Document Dawn. There was 59 counts. She's like, we're going to find at least one, maybe more than one, for each of the counts to show that you're innocent, to diffuse any notion of fraud or deceit. Well, the second trial was a catastrophe for the prosecutors. First, they thought I was going to be convicted again. Then I started having all this evidence that they said didn't exist. And then they figured out that Dawn must have been helping me. When they saw her name on the witness list, they went crazy. They threatened Dawn. They went to her parents' house, Ed and Karen Pasela. They're wonderful people. They threatened them. Okay, Ed's a veteran, served in Vietnam, patriotic family. She's working for law enforcement, and they're here threatening. So Dawn was scared out of her wits, and she moved into her parents' house and was hiding because they were literally staking out her apartment in Parma. And she called the court and said that she was being threatened, and then they let her talk to me. And I said, well, Dawn, look, I've won this case. I'm just going to take you off the witness list. Forget this. And she said, no, I have to come in. They know I'm helping you. And we practiced. She gave me questions to ask her. Like I was supposed to ask her, what were your concerns about evidence? Or how did we meet? And are there voice recordings? I was supposed to ask her like open-ended questions. Dawn wanted to speak. She said, if you ask me what time it is, I got to say it's 10:30 in the morning or something. You want to give an open-ended question. So she was planning on coming in. My case was over except her as my last witness. She didn't show up. The Judge Gall, said, look, this is going on forever. If she doesn't come, we got to go to closing statements. So we looked for her. She wasn't in the hallway. He said, I'm going to handle other matters, but at 1 o'clock, that's it. She doesn't come. We're going to just do the closing statements. And she didn't show up. And then the case ended.
Tony Viola's story is a powerful reminder of why we do what we do here at Wickedly Judged. His resilience, courage, and determination to uncover the truth are nothing short of inspiring. But his fight for justice isn't over, and neither is ours. If Tony's story moved you, here's how you can take action and join the fight for justice. Visit Tony's website, learn more about Tony's case, read the evidence for yourself, and support his ongoing fight for justice at freeTonyViola.com. You can also honor Dawn Pasela's legacy. Dawn's bravery and sacrifice deserves to be remembered. Visit justicefordawn.com to learn about her story, her contributions, and the ongoing efforts to seek accountability for her untimely death. Visit our website. Head over to wickedlyjudged.com to learn more about Tony's case and others like it. Our website is a hub for advocacy, education, and resources to help you get involved. Support our mission by purchasing our exclusive merchandise like the Wickedly Judged logo t-shirt, Prison Reform t-shirt, or Justice is Blind t-shirt. You're directly contributing to our efforts to expose injustice and advocate for those who've been wrongfully convicted. Every purchase makes a difference. Share this episode. The more people who hear Tony's story, the greater push for change. Share this episode with your friends, your family, and your networks. Use the hashtag #WickedlyJudged to join the conversation on social media. Follow us on social media. Stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn for updates on new episodes, advocacy efforts, and ways to get involved. Reach out to us. If you have information about a wrongful conviction or you want to join the fight for justice, we want to hear from you. email us at wickedlyjudged@gmail.com or call us 513-393-7452. You can also get involved locally. Advocacy starts in your own community. Find local organizations working on justice reform, attend events, or volunteer your time to help make a difference. A special thank you again to Veteran Alliance for sponsoring this episode and to JP Verse of Versifier Records for the incredible music that brings our podcast to life. And finally, to all of our listeners, thank you for being a part of this movement. Your support, your voices, and your actions are what make change possible. Together, we can expose injustice, fight for reform, and create a system that truly serves justice. Don't miss next week's episode where we'll continue Tony Viola's story with the second half of his interview. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay hopeful, because nobody deserves to be wickedly judged.